Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in today on the last day of the month of Spoops, also known as Halloween. As you can see, I am a flapper from the Salem Witch Trials. Today we're going to be talking about Doom 3, co-developed by id Software and Vicarious Visions, those people who made a bunch of random Game Boy Advance games that one time a long time ago and then much later made the Insane Trilogy. The reason I'm talking about this on Halloween is because it's supposed to be a horror game, and I say supposed to for a reason, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. Anyways, let's get into it. And then you cut the footage.
The Doom series is huge in gaming, and so it may seem like there would be no reason to have to explain the whole series. But a lot of my viewers probably don't know all about it. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to get into the very deep and complex and confusing lore of the Doom series, which is very strange, basically demons on Mars. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I will say that this game is rated M for general gore and normal stuff like that. It also tries to have some pretty spooky monster designs, so that's just a general warning to everybody out there. The reason I've decided to do Doom 3 for a Halloween video may seem odd to the people familiar with the Doom games, but we'll get to that. Doom 3 was conceived as a remake of the original game. You could say that it is pretty much what it is, but I would argue in execution it did end up as more of a reboot than a remake. I don't really want to get into what I think the canonicity of the games are because it's, complicated like I said, or it's just a mess to get into. With all that being said, I will be playing the release of Doom 3 for the original Xbox, and I'll talk about some of the minor differences as we go. First off, I will say this game is one of the more story-heavy Doom games. Each game does have a plot, but for the most part you'll never find that plot in-game. Rather, Doom 3 has cutscenes and does lots of things to help flesh out its story. Not the least of which is a System Shock or really Bioshock-style audio logs that you can listen to while playing. The story is not incredibly complicated at face value, and I'll give you the simple version. You play as Doom Guy, I guess. You would think that with the fleshed out characters they would actually name him, but rather they just leave that up to you. Anyways, you play as Doom Guy and arrive on Mars with your luggage. As you're about to go get set up, you overhear some scandalous conversation in the background. But yeah, it's probably nothing. Pretty much right away, you are sent to find a missing scientist and definitely not blow anyone up with your flashlight.
Don't know if I can really help you with anything. Kind of busy here. Just finish the coupling so we can continue.
Hey, what the hell's going on up there?
Whoops. Eventually you find him, and I'm serious when I say that all hell breaks loose. After that little fun sidetrack, you are called to regroup. After fruitlessly trying that for a decent while, you overhear the same two people having a conversation, yet again through the vents. They seem like some swell fellas, I tell you what. Regardless, you start to come across some more monsters at this part. Generally after this, they continue to introduce new monsters every so often until the end of the game, so that's a plus. As far as I can tell, you end up wandering around for a bit. After this, then you can just keep running into those two and something portal to hell. Save the world of Mars, and of Earth.
Yeah.
I could go into more depth, but there is actually a story here, so I'll leave you with mostly just the premise. Other than that, let's talk about delivery. I'm gonna be honest, the voice acting is pretty decent, especially for Doom Guy.
I'm gonna need you to step on one of those red squares on the floor for a bioscan. This'll only take a second. Okay, let me get this started.
The characters speak in a fairly convincing way, and they generally sound pretty good. But even better, the audio logs are actually borderline great, and they really help push immersion. Immersion. This game actually puts a lot of work into being an immersive experience. If you pay attention to your surroundings, the world around you actually makes almost perfect sense. It seems like a ridiculous concept to have a portal to hell on Mars, but the designers took great strides to make sure that the facility and the systems made a lot of sense. Sometimes when playing a game, I think to myself, why are there canteens here? Or why is there a floating gun in front of me? This game does follow some tropes, of course, but it at least tries to earn them. Tons of people are dead, or possessed, so to an extent it makes sense that you would be seeing these med packs or ammo strewn about. People were trying to survive. Like I said, you actually encounter some people that do. As I mentioned earlier about the voice logs, at the beginning of the game, you were given a PDA. It was a sign of the times, what can be said? I'm sure hundreds of years from now, the go-to tech piece will be a Palm Pilot. Anyways, it actually makes for a neat mechanic. I know a lot of people hate reading in a first-person shooter to try and get more story or lore, but it's actually portrayed in a fairly reasonable way. You take the data from other PDAs and give yourself access to that information, but when you read the emails, some of the people had junk mail in their inbox, or even petty complaints about not being invited to play D&D, even though you let someone borrow your dice and that's what they're doing with it. It can be kind of fun to look through. The main reason you'll want to, though, is not so much just for kicks, but you can actually get some really useful information from these emails, like locker combinations. This helps you stock up on ammo, health, and armor, which is really important on the higher difficulties. Well, not Nightmare. It doesn't give you anything on Nightmare. It also helps the world feel more reasonable and believable. When you get the actual gameplay, though, it very much reminds me of the Halo games on the same system, which is not really a bad thing. Shots are satisfying to land, much like in the previous Doom games, and you feel like the weapons are cool and useful. Most of the game takes place in narrow corridors, though, which works fine for the horror atmosphere, but it is very maze-like and can be confusing to navigate. If you get turned around, it can take a little while to get reoriented, which can be frustrating. This adds to the length of the game time. Working on it moderately consistently, it still took me a decent amount of time to beat. But I feel like that can be partially attributed to the confusing layouts and another thing that I actually like, the interactable computer screens everywhere. They also make you feel like you're a part of the world and involved, but they can be somewhat easy to miss at times. You then might be running around for 30 minutes trying to figure out what to do when all you had to do was press a button on a screen that you had already pressed a button on before. But it is also exciting to find someone's PDA and get a security clearance update, and then run back to the restricted door you saw before to finally go in. It isn't completely the game's fault either, though. Once I started to get my mind around how the game worked, I stopped getting lost near as much. When it comes to the game actually starting to throw puzzles at you, they can be really cool. The game doesn't really hold your hand at all and leaves it to you to figure things out. So when you do finally solve it, you feel like you really had to be clever to come up with the solution. I will say that the game has very few puzzles in it though, so I think I won't spoil any of them. But they are surprisingly good. When it comes to horror though, yeah, I picked this as an October game because I knew it was intended to be a horror game. But it didn't give me that horrified feeling, even a little. It doesn't do horror that well, but I can say that it does atmosphere great. That is probably as close as it gets, but it does it very well. The game is dark and brooding, and you hear monsters in the distance that could come for you. It's not really scary though, and the foreboding atmosphere does come back to bite it. Somewhere around 3/4 of the game takes place in the exact same gray corridor environment. I felt like I had seen most of what the game had to show, but I had heard that the hell level is where the game really started to shine, so I powered through to see something new and hopefully scary. I would also like to note that I did most often play the game in the middle of the night with the lights off to really give it the best chance to scare me. Hell looked very interesting, and it was a nice late game for a change of pace compared to the indoor Mars facilities before, and some segments were a pretty decent amount of fun, but man, sometimes Hell could be frustrating. I know, what a shock. There were some platforming segments that were very annoying because these skull enemies can push you really far when they hit you, and they aren't super easy to take out because they aren't very big. It wasn't impossible, but it was not super fun exactly. It was in Hell that I started autosaving constantly. If you don't, you could end up going back as far as sometimes as 3 levels, because the game does not autosave between levels at all. But it does give you the ability to not only save whenever, but also to quick save with the select button, which is a feature that I absolutely adore. It's very smart and very useful. Then the game got a lot less frustrating because I wasn't losing progress as much, although, Hell included, the entire game gets way easier with the chainsaw, once you find it, which yes, they do justify their presence with some very funny emails. Ammo becomes so much less of an issue, and you really find the chainsaw about 2/5 of the way in. It's super fun to use though, but it's kinda loud, so you can't really listen to audio logs with it. The game does eventually take away your chainsaw though. Thankfully, it gives it back by the final boss fight, because you're gonna need it. The late game gets much harder, mostly because of the small, low-to-the-ground enemies like the spiders and cherubs. And the skulls also, like I mentioned earlier, for the same reasons. Speaking of, the monster designs are pretty dang fun. I've actually known the designs long before I knew the game because they are fairly recognizable. Both Doom 1 and 2 and Doom 3 designs, which are very different in a lot of ways. Lots of fun monsters come back with new, more amorphous designs that were fairly standard for the time that the game was released. They look good though. When it comes to monsters on screen, you won't really have problems with how the game runs at all. On the Xbox, it is super smooth. All the way up until the final boss, where it gets pretty choppy. But it's not actually horrible by any means, and there's a lot going on. As far as I could tell too, it didn't seem to drop inputs during that either, which is a big plus. Apparently, they put a lot of work into a custom Doom 3 engine, and it seems to have paid off, and works way better than it has any right to on the original Xbox. Some of the textures are jagged and blurry, and the bump mapping can get kinda garish at times, but it all still looks pretty decent on the system. I would not say it is the nicest looking game on the Xbox, but it is pretty alright. I've seen some people comparing the Xbox game to the PC version and saying it looks like garbage, when side by side, I really don't see that at all. The Xbox version doesn't even really look worse per se, mostly just different.
When talking about the game, you have to remember that it doesn't have that beautiful clean HD output, at least not as easily as you would get from a PC. You can record onboard and get this beautiful clear output. So, as far as the game goes, it may look a little bit different, but I don't actually think it looks worse, especially if you play it over component cables, which the video just looks so bad because I don't have any component cables for my original Xbox, so that's the problem with that. Anyways, as far as the game itself, I think I would give it a solid 8 out of 10, which is maybe not quite as good as it reviewed whenever it initially came out, but it's really good. It held up really well, all things considered. Especially for this kind of game, there are some games that are of this type that you can't go back and play. You wouldn't be able to enjoy them. They wouldn't be that fun. But this game actually holds up pretty well. Like I said, it is a fun, immersive experience, and I do recommend it if you like shooters from that era. It is a good one. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm releasing videos as often as possible, and since I'm in school, that's not super often. I have to work on them for like 2 months before I can put them out. And then that's just setting aside time during those 2 months, which is hard because I'm already doing homework. Anyways, again, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video or thought it was helpful, then you can go ahead and do the like button. There's a button for that. And if you want to see more, you can subscribe. You don't have to, but you can. You don't have to like it either. You can do whatever you want. And if you saw a game on my shelf right here, which is sort of at an angle off the screen right now, then you can request it in the comments down below. With all that being said, happy Halloween! Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time in Halloween with me this evening, or day, depends on what part of Halloween it is. Jesus loves you, so do I. Tune in next time, and goodbye.